DJ and PK, it's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. 4 baseball games. Starts at 11 a.m. with Detroit and Cleveland. ESPN's got the triple header today with the Red Sox and Yankees at 4 and the Reds and Dodgers at 7, with probably some grainy old video of Ken Griffey Sr. Maybe they'll run him out. And your guy Ron Say. Old school. But it's that time of year when all the sports are converging and overlapping, and it's time to talk college football right now. Shehan Jeyarajah joins us right now, CBS Sports national college football writer. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I didn't know. Sometimes you're having a day that feels a little more like West Virginia. Sometimes you're having a day that feels a little more like Texas Tech. Sometimes you're kind of, stuck in the middle like Kansas State.
Something like that. But like you said, it's becoming the best part of the sports calendar where everything converges. Hope you guys are taking care of my Baylor Bear Keontae George over there.
Oh yeah. We had Jazz Media Day, and we're the flagship station, so we were over at the practice facility and saw him and getting ready for the season and see what he can do. It's a big season for him, that's for sure.
He wasn't on our show, but he sat down with the show right after us, was over there. And the players tend to come in a little later. We tend to get more management and fewer players. And you can get that wherever you get your podcast. Just put it in. And he was so impressed with A.J. DeBonsa. He was selling A.J. DeBonsa, who's we'll see if he's the number one pick. We'll see how that works out. But he's at BYU, and he's played some pickup hoops with him, and he's very impressed. Are you impressed?
I love it.
Yeah. Are you impressed with how many teams right now in the Big 12? You sit there and think there's 4 ranked, but how many of them do you really love and you're really convinced, man, I can talk about these guys all year long, and no matter what I say, they'll back up what I say?
Well, there's one that I'm 1,000% confident. One team that I feel like at this moment you can almost pencil into Arlington, and that's Texas Tech. They've been everything that I've hoped. And the other thing, too, by the way, is that their schedule is very manageable. They have to play at Arizona State. They have a huge game against BYU that I'm hoping to attend. But, other than that, it's pretty manageable for Texas Tech. So I think that they're going to be a team that has a very legitimate chance to not just be in the playoffs, but maybe be a first-round bye as a top 4 seed. I think they're potentially that good. So that's the 1,000% lock, but a lot of other teams I like quite a bit. I think Iowa State to this point has been one of the most underrated teams in the country. I think that Arizona State, we're going to, I think, look back at that Mississippi State game as maybe not being as bad a loss after seeing the way that they competed against Tennessee. And obviously that goes down to the final play of the game on the road in Starkville. So I think they very much have the ability to bounce back. And again, there's a lot of teams that I would view as sort of cuspers, right? I think that you look at a team like TCU, again, they lose at the very last second against a very good Arizona State team. I think that Baylor has showed some signs of being potentially encouraging. Obviously, Utah, I think, is going to be in pretty good shape, and I think that they just lost to a fantastic Texas Tech team. So, honestly, I think that there are maybe 2 or 3 that I'm they are going to be there, no doubt about it. But there's a lot of other teams who I think are right on the cusp as well.
I had as my sleeper going into the season Cincinnati, and I think they're right on track to continue to be a sleeper. And I don't know that they would be finishing first or second, but I think that especially if you go into Ohio and you beat that team, that's a great victory.
I agree. And I'll tell you what, I think that I said before the year, from a pure roster perspective, there's a pretty good case that Cincinnati is a top half roster in the league. My question for them was kind of straight up, are they going to be able to execute at a high enough level? I just didn't have a lot of trust, I guess you could say, in the coaching staff. Now, I think they've done a much better job in 2025 situationally. The fact is, I went and calculated. They had lost a year and a half worth of 1-4 games over the last 2 years. They had lost something like 6 straight, and they finally get one on the road against a really good Kansas team that I have a lot of excitement for. So the fact that they've been able to handle those moments well is huge. I think that Brendan Sorsby is probably the best quarterback in the Big 12 that nobody's talking about, maybe the best in college football that nobody's talking about. And I think that they have shown that they've maybe taken that little bit of a step. And by the way, they did that last week against Kansas without their best player, Dante Corleone, in the lineup. So I think this is a team that definitely could be in that 8-9 win conversation, which would be a fantastic situation for a staff that looked like they were in a bit of trouble heading into the year.
PK went to Arizona State, so he is always watching them with a critical eye as long as they don't play head-to-head with Utah and BYU, especially home games. And one thing he constantly says here is they're winning a lot of one-score games. Are they at the point where you think these one-score victories ought to even out and the ball ought to bounce against them a few times? Or do you think Dillingham somehow has recruited guys / established a culture who thrive in those situations and that they are going to win more than their share of those one-score games?
I think that they definitely are going to be a team that wins more than their fair share. But like you said, some of this stuff is just the bounce of the ball. And you see that against Mississippi State, right? A game where obviously they are in a position to win it in the last minute. And last year, I mean, you go through, they beat Kansas State in a very close game. They beat BYU in a very close game. They beat UCF in a very close game. Like, it's just hard to do it that many times. So I think that this is a team that, if they're in close games, they're going to win 60+% of it. But again, if you start to add those numbers up, that's where you run yourself into trouble. I was hoping to a certain extent that, when they played some of these other teams, that they'd be able to pull away and make it not a one-score game. But, I will say too, their early season schedule has been tough. And by the way, they get Utah and Texas Tech and Houston and Iowa State next. So it's not necessarily going to get easier for them. So I think it's a team that is going to win more than their fair share of one-score games. But I don't know if you can guarantee that they're going to handle it to the same extent that they did last year, where, they basically sweep their one-score games after that Tech loss. So that is definitely a concern for me. Especially, again, when you have a situation where the game can swing on one play, on one takeaway, on one interception. And so I think that, for me to view them as a sort of top-tier contender, they've got to start putting away some of these games earlier.
I thought maybe Arizona can give some teams some tough games, and obviously they got smoked pretty much by Iowa State. Does that knock them down a little bit in your opinion? Because we've got, I assume BYU is going to beat West Virginia, and then they go to Arizona the following week.
Yeah, I think that for me, Arizona's goal this year is to get to a bowl game. It's to have a decent season, to be competitive against some of the better teams in the league. And they weren't on the road against Iowa State. And I think Iowa State's very good. So, I mean, look, they host Oklahoma State this next week. I think BYU is going to be a tough game for them. But, again, if you go into the second half of the schedule with a 4-2 record and you really, have a chance to get 3 more other than that, that's plenty to me. I think that this is a team that is simply looking for improvement, simply looking for, I guess you could call it, positive reversion to the mean after what happened last year. And outside of that Iowa State game, I mean, again, I think they're going to have a chance to be competitive in a lot of these games heading forward. I think the big thing is when you do play the BYUs, the Arizona States, even the Baylors and Kansas potentially, you want to be in those games. You want to have a chance in those games. I don't think you have to win them in year 2 under Brent Brennan, but I think that you need to not be outclassed. If every game against a good team looks like it did against Iowa State, I think that's a problem. But I think of this team, again, this is the first moment that they've been presented with a challenge like Iowa State. I don't think they handled it well, but I don't think that necessarily means that they're completely down for the count. I think that this is still a very good team, and Noah Fafita is finally kind of back to looking like the quarterback that we thought he was in 2023.
All right, you've talked. There's a lot of 3-1 teams in this league. You've talked about Cincinnati, and you've talked a little bit about TCU and Arizona. UCF is 3-1. Are they going to be good enough to beat some of the top teams in the league and open the door for BYU and Utah? You need help late in the year. You need somebody to get knocked off. Is UCF a team that can do that, or are they paper tiger on a September schedule and they're not even going to be bowl eligible?
Yeah, I think that they're probably a paper tiger. I mean, Kansas State's really kind of took it to them in the second half of that game, and Kansas State hasn't been great this year. You look at the wins that they've got. It was a one-score win against Jacksonville State. It was that decimation of North Carolina, who looked like one of the worst teams in the country, and it was an FCS win. So I don't necessarily know that they're going to be able to beat and compete with some of the better teams in the league. Now, I think that they maybe, especially with Taven Jackson at quarterback, are a little bit more of a chaos team than they could have been. I mean, again, especially you look at that first game. I mean, they looked terrible against Jacksonville State. Maybe should have lost that game, frankly. But I just don't know if they have the depth of talent right now, especially on offense, to be able to hang in that late stretch. I mean, in the last few weeks of the year, they get both Texas Tech and BYU. I don't know if they can hang in those games, especially with both those games being on the road. And so, I don't necessarily know that this is a team that's going to be much more than competing for trying to get out of the bottom three of the Big 12.
How much do you think that the national playoff that they created and expanded has maybe dented, I don't want to go ruined, but dented the regular season? And what I'm going to use this as an example, that you got the situation with Penn State and Oregon. Okay, it's a big game, overtime, blah, blah, blah. Franklin can't win the big game, but he's got two more games against ranked teams, right? He's got Ohio State and Indiana. My guess is he'll beat Ohio State or lose to Ohio State, maybe beat Indiana. They got two losses, so that puts them in the playoff just like last year. I mean, Ohio State loses to, and you're supposed to, if you lose early in the season. Ohio State loses the last game to Michigan and finishes fourth, still gets in, and we know what happens. So I didn't understand why it was so dramatic, because I think it's, to an extent, these bigger conferences has become like the NCAA tournament in basketball. Who really cares if you finish first, second, or third in your conference as long as you get in the tournament and are playing in the Elite Eight?
So there are two ways I want to address this question. The first is, I think that one thing that it has done is, yes, it puts a little bit less weight on the biggest of the big games, right? Ohio State versus Michigan doesn't mean as much as it used to. Texas, Oklahoma doesn't mean as much. But I think that what we are seeing is that there are 150 other games that wouldn't have meant as much, that suddenly mean a whole lot. I think about, for example, in week one, we have a South Florida versus Boise State game. That game was a playoff game in a lot of ways. Boise State is kind of out because of that game, whereas 2 years ago, where we're talking about a 14 playoff, that's not a game that's really on national radars the same way. And there are many, many examples of it. I think even, for example, if you talk about, with auto bids, like every single game that impacts the Big 12 title race is suddenly a nationally relevant game in a way that was not the case just a couple of years ago. So I think that that's one piece of it, is that, maybe it impacts the top six and the importance of their game. But I think with teams 7 through 45, it makes every one of their games substantially more important and more watchable and builds more narrative around those games. And actually, even looking back to 2024, I mean, I can't tell you how many stories I was able to get greenlit on Group of 5 teams, because suddenly their games were incredibly important to the national picture. So that's one piece of it. The other thing, too, though, is that, I'll tell you what, I get to sit here and see the traffic and analytics and reception and all this stuff after the game. There has been very little drop-off in terms of interest in these games. And I mean that also from the perspective of, look, obviously James Franklin and Penn State have the ability to play their way back into that situation. But, people are ready to jump on Franklin. And, these games are huge narrative setters for these teams, even if, again, they have the opportunity to bounce back to them. I mean, think about, again, a couple of years ago, right? We'd be going through the last 9 games of the season, essentially, ignoring what might be the most talented roster in the country at Penn State. Whereas now this is it turns up the temperature, it turns up the interest in some ways of you better do this. You better go on the road and beat Ohio State, who's number 1 in the country. You better handle Indiana, which again is playing one of the best teams in the country right now. So I think that while again, there was a time when seasons were just over and you eliminated teams when these sort of things happen. I think that this actually drives interest in conversation in a lot of ways, because here's the reality too, right, is that if Penn State can't beat one of those two teams, then they're out. And then all of a sudden you're having legit fire James Franklin conversations. You're having real, this is one of the great failures of the playoff era conversation. And again, I think that the one thing, too, that is comparable with the NCAA tournament is that different teams are playing for different things, right? Kentucky's not just playing to make the NCAA tournament. They're playing for a trip to the Final Four. If they don't do that, then that's considered a disappointing season. Other teams are just trying to make it into the field. That's going to be the case with the Boise State last year, with an SMU last year. And so I think that very much does adjust the way that we look at it, where, again, for a team like Penn State, with what they invested into their team, being the 11th seed in the college football playoff is not really considered any sort of real success because they're meant to be competing for something more.
To your point, I suddenly find several Notre Dame games interesting because with losses to Miami and A&M, they're right on the cusp. If they win 10 in a row and Miami and Texas A&M are both in, there's an argument that, they've gotten a lot better, and they lost to two really good teams that are in. Plus, let's face it, they're Notre Dame, so they'll probably get the benefit of the doubt. But along the way, they got to play Boise State. They got to play USC. Navy's off to a good start. Could Navy upset them? Any one of these guys, I feel like I have to at least check the Notre Dame score to see if they're in a game they might lose or if, like Arkansas, they're running away and hiding.
Yeah, it's 10 straight playoff games, essentially, for Notre Dame at this point. Because here's the other thing, too, right, is like you said, they're probably not going to be not talked about, right? They're Notre Dame. Even in a previous year, we're probably going to find some way to talk about them. But the way that it changes is that it shifts the onus in so many ways onto the teams that they're playing. It's a big opportunity for Boise. Like if Boise State goes out and beats Notre Dame, all of a sudden we're forgiving them a little bit for what happened against South Florida, right? So there's so many more opportunities for different teams to play their way into attention. And that's the thing that I have loved the most through 1 year of the college football playoff, going to 12 teams, is that, again, there are just so many more teams involved in different ways. And again, I can say as somebody who can see the analytics on this stuff, it drives interest in moving away from just the top 5 or so brands in college football.
What's your reaction to the Oklahoma State situation?
Oh, man, it is. I wasn't optimistic about that group coming into the year, but it has been so much worse than obviously I expected. I mean, this is a team that I think will contend to be the worst team in the power conferences. I think it's a team that will contend to be one of the worst teams in the country. I will say, you know what, like Doug Meacham, their interim coach, has come in and really seemed to loosen things up. I obviously kept a close eye on that Baylor-Oklahoma State game last week, and Dave Aranda said after the game, like, you know what, they came out in a bunch of wonky stuff that they haven't done all year long because they were just throwing stuff out there, and they managed to move the ball and try some things and do some things a little bit because Doug Meacham was like, screw it, why not? So this is, from a roster perspective, a brutal situation. I think that one thing that's very underrated about how difficult this is that they have 65 new players this year. So it's not like a situation, I mean, even let's make the comparison of like an Arkansas where, you know, you fire the coach and then maybe these guys who have played together and grown up together, like they get a chance to try to figure something out and bounce back. Like this isn't one of those situations. All of these guys came here essentially, you know, not in a negative way, but as mercenaries. And so now a lot of them are going to have to decide, like, do I sit out and redshirt so I can transfer again next year and get a real opportunity to play? Like I don't know how you handle that as a program and as a staff. And again, it's just very difficult to see where exactly even a single win could come from this year.
Shehan, we appreciate it as always. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thank you so much for having me.
Shehan Jeyarajah, join us right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, talking all things Big 12 each and every week. We're going to take a break after PK says something.
I don't think that it's ruined or dented the enthusiasm for the game. Mm-hmm. I just think that the big games aren't as big as they used to for the big boys.
Right. I agree. And I think he agreed when he said Ohio State and Michigan doesn't carry the weight it used to.
And, okay, South Florida and Boise becomes a playoff game, but everybody expects those teams or that team, whoever it is, to get worked in the first game in the playoff anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's good for them to get in, but that's it. Then they lose. Then they go home.
So I don't really live and die with Notre Dame, but I just think if Notre Dame gets a third loss, it could open a spot for a Big 12 team. Now, it may not. It may be a fifth team from the SEC.
Right. I'll believe it when I see it.
I get it. I totally get that. But I know if Notre Dame wins out for 10 and gets to 10-2, I don't think there's any chance. Use BYU's 10-2 team last year, and it could be whoever this year.
No, I agree.
Utah, Iowa State, BYU again.
Well, we're 1 for 1, and we're going to be 2 for 2
Yeah,
if it
Notre
happens.
Dame will get that.
Because it's a TV show.
See,
And Notre Dame brings the biggest amount of people.
But if Notre Dame gets another loss, maybe that opens the door.
Maybe.
Because I do think, to his point, Big 12 teams are playing to either get in or win a game. Anything beyond that?
I think they have a better chance
A better chance than what?
to get to the Final Four, I guess.
Than what I just said?
Yeah.
Or versus, okay.
I mean, I'm talking at large. Now, I'm not talking about an individual team, an individual year.
I'm going back, and I know you agree with this take because I've heard you made it. You know, the Utes, they've had a lot of success under Kyle, and they've gotten to a high level. But there's a level when they get to, they're bumping against the ceiling.
Agreed.
And that, I think, is that national semifinal. To win a quarterfinal game and to be one of the 4 teams left, you got to beat one of those teams that the Utes usually lose to. Certainly they did, obviously, in the Rose Bowls to Penn State and Ohio
But
State.
I do think things are changing in that you have a number of players now that can go get money and play. So the big dogs goes back to what was said. There's an opportunity to have some leveling there with the $20.5 million on the resolution from the senator.
So Texas
House,
Tech
whatever it is.
or Indiana or somebody I don't expect is going to do it?
Yes. Yes.
That would be great because I'll be rooting for that
Yes.
team. I grew up rooting for the little guy. I just default to rooting for the underdog. I do it all the time. And you've been on the outside looking in? Yes. You're my team.
Okay.
Let's go.
I think there's a better chance of that happening than maybe you're saying, and I think there's a better chance than ever. TCU is just, or not TCU, Texas Tech is rolling in the 5-star guys.
Yeah.
They're not a little guy
They're not
anymore.
a little guy, no.
But they'll be in the Big 12 for the
For
foreseeable
foreseeable future.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens when we get to 2030 and who does what.
Right.
All right, DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. Stay with us. Coming up next, everything you missed in this show, we'll wrap it all up.